Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com, and well-known non-conservative. Excuse me. Nothing like getting things off to a start with a series of sneezes. So conservatism was always a dead end. Always. And a lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people don't understand what conservatism is. And unless you understand what something is, then you can't understand why it is or is not effective. So what I'm going to explain to you tonight is why conservatism has failed to conserve anything, and that it was always bound to fail because of its nature. So this is actually taken from a book that I wrote with John Red Eagle back in late 2015 or 2016, I believe. It's called Conservative, and I'm going to be relying on it. I'm going to be relying on it in order to explain some of these concepts. Appreciate the compliments on the audio. I promised you some time ago that I was going to be getting a gain booster. I now have the gain booster. It works exactly as I'd hoped, and so very pleased by that. If you're not familiar with Conservative, you might want to consider taking a look at it. We've got the audiobook available. And it's actually, if you get it on Archaven, it's actually an audiobook plus, which means that you get the audiobook and the ebook in one. So one of the memes that I've found most effective is talking about how conservatism has totally failed to conserve anything. It didn't conserve the Boy Scouts. It didn't conserve the VFW. It didn't conserve the Christian nation. It didn't conserve even the ladies' rooms. And so it's really, really kind of depressing when you look at how much hope a lot of people had, especially dating back to the 1980s when conservatism really came into its own and really came to the fore. And it's also disappointing because we thought of Ronald Reagan as being a real hero. And yet, if you look at his legacy continues to look worse and worse over time. And the reason is that conservatism is not an actual political philosophy. It's not a coherent worldview. Short Bear adds, I used to call myself a conservative, then I realized they played to lose. It was like their role was to lose. Does that make sense? It does make sense. And in fact, there is some reason to believe that people like William F. Buckley were essentially there to play the role of the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters. Let me read a little bit to you about what we're talking about here. I need to look this stuff up because it's been so long since I've even looked at this book. But let's see here. From conservative to conservative. This is from chapter 4. And fortunately, so here is the point. First of all, there's two different kinds of conservative. The first type of conservative is the English conservative. This is the tradition of Edmund Burke and it's known as the tradition that currently is represented today by what's called the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom, the Tories. And obviously, they are not particularly conservative in the American context. The American conservative movement really began, even though Buckley is famous for it, it really began with an author by the name of Russell Kirk. And Russell Kirk published The Conservative Mind in 1953. And The Conservative Mind is canonical among the intellectuals and pseudo-intellectuals of the conservative movement. And so this is what we mean when we talk about a conservative in the American context. And he talks about how what he was doing was he was intentionally attempting to synthesize a number of 18th and 19th century thinkers and incorporating some of the concepts from the founding fathers, incorporating some of the concepts from Burke and English conservatism, as well as incorporating concepts from the Enlightenment. And so what he said were the 6 canons, the 6 principles of this new conservatism were: number 1, belief in a transcendent order or body of natural law which rules society as well as conscience. Number 2, affection for the proliferating variety and mystery of human existence, as opposed to the narrowing uniformity, egalitarianism, and utilitarian aims of most radical systems. Number 3, the conviction that civilized society requires orders and classes, as against the notion of a classless society. Number 4, the persuasion that freedom and property are closely linked. Number 5, custom, convention, and old prescription are checks upon both man's anarchic impulse and upon the innovator's lust for power. And then number 6, recognition that change may not be salutary reform. Hasty innovation may be a devouring conflagration rather than a torch of progress. Society must alter, for prudent change is the means of social preservation, but a statesman must take providence into his calculations. And so if you notice that there is no coherent program there. There is no coherent philosophy there. This is a fundamentally reactive mode of thought, and it is a fundamentally attitudinal posture. It's not actually a position. Muffhead notes, conservative and the alt-right, eventually the alternative becomes the mainstream, are both words that won't rally the right into the future. We need new rhetoric and a way to keep the tent big. I agree, because alternative, and even my preferred term of unauthorized right, are both reactive, and they don't provide the basis for anything. That's why I think that nationalist right and calling ourselves nationalists is American nationalists, in the case of most people here, is important. And I think it's not an accident that the most successful European right-wing parties are focused on the nation. Probably the most powerful right-wing party in all of Europe is the Schweizer Volkspartei, the Swiss People's Party, which is very, very focused on Swiss nationalism. It's not an accident that the most powerful party in Italy is La Liga. Now, La Liga actually began as a regional party. The original name was La Liga Nord, and the leader of it was considered to be a buffoon. Umberto Eco actually coined a word that I couldn't figure out until I realized that he coined a word, celodurismo, that he was actually using to mock Umberto Bossi, who was the head of the Lega Nord, before Matteo Salvini came along. But, La Liga has ridden Italian nationalism and opposition to the European Union to power. They're not the largest political party. That's their left-wing allies, Movimento Cinque Stelle, but they're actually more powerful. If an election was held again, La Liga would definitely win. And so the direction that allows people to rally around a concept is nationalism. Temujin says, is Taiwan a nation, or is it Chinese, or both? It's a divided nation. You have the native Taiwanese, but then you also have the Chinese population that came over with Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese nationalists. So we'll get to some of these discussions later. I mean, some of you guys are gravitating towards the logical next steps, but let's lay the foundation first. So interestingly enough, it says the nascent conservative movement did attract some of the surviving remnants of the old right, including the intellectual forerunners of the libertarian movement, Southern agrarians, and isolationist nationalists of various sorts. Others joined the movement as well, including the dissident Trotskyites and Cold War hawks who later evolved into the neoconservatives. Contrary to what is often believed today, and this is key, the first wave of conservatives did not include fundamentalist Christians in any numbers. So this is the connection to between Christianity and the SJWs. It was actually the progressive movement of the early 20th century that was heavily Christian. It wasn't until the 80s that that you had the alliance between the evangelicals and the conservatives. But the point is that conservatives don't have a political philosophy. They don't have any core at their base, which is why they have no reason to hold to anything. They don't have a coherent program. And that's one of the problems. Like Watchman 245 says, I don't know about nationalism. I would rather be called a constitutionalist. Well, that's why you're irrelevant. The Constitution is literally a piece of paper. It's an agreement. It's like saying, I prefer to be called a contractualist. Well, an allegiance to those ideas in the Constitution is not coherent because the Constitution itself was a compromise. And so, there were two very different philosophical strains at war, which is why we talk about the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. The Constitution was a compromise that favored the Federalists, and we are where we are today in part because the Federalists won. And a lot of the problems that we're seeing are the result of things that the Anti-Federalists predicted would happen because of the fundamental flaws of federalism and therefore of your constitutionalism. And so, so now you understand, now you should understand why conservatism couldn't conserve anything. It's not only, in policy terms, a fundamentally defensive and reflexive attitude, but it has no positive program of its own. Really? Really? Conservatives don't have a platform? Really? Let me tell you about Birch Gold. That never stops being funny. Anyhow, and so remember, if you're a Christian, being a conservative has nothing to do with Christianity. Christians were not a significant part of the original conservative movement. And so it's not a reasonable or functional option. And so when you're looking at alternatives, when you're looking at where do we go now, conservatism is not an option. You know, it's an attitude, it's a posture, and you can't beat a philosophy with a posture for the same reason that you can't beat a religion with a philosophy. You know, conservatives have been going into the political battle with the intellectual equivalent of a rubber knife, while Democrats and liberals and progressives at least have a coherent policy. They have a coherent philosophy. They have actual policies. They have actual objectives. And so it's just not something that you're going to be able to win with. You will never be able to win with it. And so, it's something that you're going to need to understand if you call yourself a conservative, because you might as well call yourself, a curmudgeon. That's as effective and as legitimate. Charlemagne says, I like the idea that conservatism hides the reality of the one-party state, that it's fake opposition to the left to placate the right. Americans hate the idea of only one party, so it has to be hidden. Well, I think that is the practical reality. I don't think that was ever the point. I don't think that Russell Kirk ever had any notion of that. I think that he was trying to put together a coherent philosophy, and he failed. Because one of the problems that we have from the American perspective is that we want to have this fake nationalism. We want to believe that this melange of people can actually be a real nation. And I think that we did make a fair amount of progress towards that. But that progress was arrested and then completely negated by the continuing flood of immigration post-1965. And so, so there's no way that conservatives, that civic nationalists, that the Republican establishment can even begin to address the problems of American empire, collapsing American empire, because that's what we're seeing. And so, I think that the wisest thing for people to do is to understand that the empire is going to collapse, and begin to build alternative structures and communities based on coherent philosophies that are capable of surviving. Muffhead says, did this all start going off the rails when Buckley eviscerated the John Birch Society? No, I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying that what Buckley did was inevitable. The conservative movement already contained within itself the seeds of its own failure when it was first conceived in 1953. Because what Russell Kirk created and what became known as the conservative movement was never anything but an incoherent collection of rival philosophies that happened to share a number of common interests. I mean, what on earth do Southern agrarians have in common with dissident Trotskyites? Nothing. The only thing they had in common was they both wanted to win the Cold War. And once the Cold War ended, the whole thing, of course, went completely to hell because they no longer had anything in common. What do we have in common with a Ben Shapiro? Ben Shapiro has openly demanded the U.S. create an empire in the Middle East on behalf of Israel. What does that have to do with the libertarians? What does that have to do with the Southern agrarians? What does that have to do with any of those other elements of the conservative movement? Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Let's see. Americans conservative. Okay, that's so anyhow, I think that it's important to understand that there is no fixing the conservative movement. You can't fix National Review. You can't fix the Republican establishment. And you need to understand that, because you can't do anything. You can't go on the offensive. You can't do anything productive as long as you don't grasp the fact that that's the reality. Anyhow, let's go ahead and take a few questions. I can feel it coming. The Air Bear says it can be fixed. No, it can't be fixed because it was a failure. It was a design failure. There is no conservative philosophy. And so you can't build a successful political movement without a political philosophy. The Dashing Rogue says, I gave Jordan B. Peterson a copy of Jordanetics. I have a video. Please, please, please send me a link to it. I absolutely have to show that on the Darkstream sometime. You could say Ben is even a liar on the two things we agree on, free speech and guns, because when you let the other team replace you, you lose those rights too, right? Well, I don't even agree with Ben on free speech, and also Ben doesn't believe in free speech. You know, Ben Shapiro has come out and said that anyone who is racist or engages in hate speech should be hunted down and disemployed. I don't believe in free speech either, because free speech is a enlightenment weapon that was intended to be used to destabilize Christian power in Western civilization. If you don't understand what I'm talking about there, I highly recommend that you read the book, A History of the Freedom of Thought by J.B. Bury. It was written in the early 20th century by someone who was very, very pro freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and he makes it very clear what it is. Ryan Atkinson said, can you address American nationalists for those who are not direct posterity of the founders? I am half British and half German. How would nationalism look? Look, you need to stop this whole what about me thing. Okay? Number one, I don't care. Number two, it's not up to me. Number three, it's all about what you identify with and what you are accepted as. I may be an American Indian, but I am accepted as a white American because of how I look and how I was raised. I will not be accepted as an Italian, no matter how good my Italian gets, no matter how long I live here, and neither will my kids. They will always be stranieri to some extent. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be a welcome addition. It was very interesting to see how over time in our comunale, in our village, we went from being the Americans to our Americans. You know, a lot of people get offended and upset when they say, well, you say I'm not part of the nation, but I'm a citizen. Well, paperwork is not blood. And just because you don't have blood doesn't mean that you're not accepted, loved, and valued. Of course, it behooves you to behave, to be a good guest, to be a good adoptee. But never make the mistake of believing that you are just the same as everybody else. You're not. Your instincts are wrong. Your traditions are wrong. You don't necessarily fit in every possible way. Cowboy Bear says, it can't be fixed. Those that seek that kind of power are exactly the kind that should have no measure of power. We can pull it all down and rebuild. We don't need to pull it all down. It's going to fall down. That's what I've been trying to tell people for the last 10 years. People never used to believe me. Now everybody does. Kind of funny how that works, huh? I missed one here. Hano says, Ben has even cucked on guns. He is worthless. Oh, I think he's worse than worthless. I think that he is quite clearly an enemy of America. For all that he tries to pose as a champion of Americans, he's clearly an enemy of the American people. He's an enemy of American posterity. He's an enemy of Christianity. I mean, at no point is he on our side in any of this. And it grieves me that so many people are fooled by this ridiculous act. I mean, it's been obvious to me since 2005. I'm on the record. You can go back and read my columns about the littlest chicken hawk back in 2005. Id Prism says, will we have to deport all of the bad guests that are anti-Second Amendment in the new American states? Probably wise to. Will we have to conquer them in order to prevent them from being conquered by others? Well, I think that you're still thinking in terms of a contiguous political entity. That's not going to be the case. There isn't going to be a 50-state United States of America for much longer. It'll probably last, I've always said that I expect in the 2033 timeframe. Some people think I'm an optimist. Andrew B. says, I use your Italian woman from the village next over as an example with a friend of mine who asked if we would ever be accepted as from Mississippi, as we both grew up out of state. I mean, it depends on the strength of the ties in the community. Here in Europe, in these villages where you can literally see the familial relationship between people. They joke in the town that I'm in that they'll talk about so-and-so being a certain last name squared because both the husband and the wife have the same last name. They're not, closely related, but they're related enough that they all have the same name. I mean, it's kind of funny because every business in town has one of three names. And if you go to 2 villages over, you'll see that there's a different set of names. And so we have some friends who've had the same house since 1525 in their family. And so, you're not going to fool anyone. You're not going to fit in there. On the other hand, I was generally accepted as being a native Minnesotan, even though I wasn't. I was born in Boston, and my family and I looked different. You know, we were smaller and darker. I mean, I'm very light, but my brothers all have black hair and dark skin. And so we looked different than all the Germans and Scandinavians. But you got to remember that they have only, they have only been, Minnesota got settled in the, mid to late 19th century. So it's a lot easier to fit into a newer community like that. Dave says, Vox, do you think you'll finish your Arts of Dark and Light series in the 12 years we have left? Well, not at the current rate. I really need to pick it up a bit, don't I? If we're going to get all 5 books done. But I'm working on it. I'm not at all unhappy because I like what I've got. I would rather take my time, get it done right, and have it be really great than just get it out there and be like, it was okay. It could have been better. So Kenneth Johnson says, WorldNet Daily writers would write about the Moshiach coming into power. Is that what is going to replace our institutions? No. In fact, you need to understand that the elite Jewish organizations don't plan to stay in the United States. They've been talking about their exit plans since 2004. In 2004, they actually met in a town called WYE, to discuss when the right time to leave the United States would be. And, so I expect that it'll be very interesting to learn if their timetable has moved up, to learn what their timetable is. At the time, they concluded what that there wasn't any need to leave yet. But you saw people like David Goldberg, is it? I can't remember. Spengler talking about maybe China would be a good option. I mean, this is something that is openly discussed. This is not conspiracy theory or anything. Are we allowed? VT785 says, are we allowed to ask which of your features are from your mom's side? Yeah, it's real easy. It's my height. That's it. Also, I guess also my eyes. But other than my relatively small height, my brothers are all 6 feet tall, and I'm only 5'9". I basically look like a miniature version of my dad. So, although well, it's kind of funny. I tend to think of myself as having gone bald, but the older I get, the more hair I have relative to other people. So who knows? Maybe if I grew it out, I would actually look like I had a reasonable head of hair. I have no idea. Rebel Without a General says, fair point about the books. Can't criticize George R. Martin too much about never finishing Game of Thrones. Well, I'm certainly not in any position to criticize him, but I think you all certainly can. So, Downward Deviant says, thank you so much for sharing your insights. They are truly refreshing. Well, thank you very much for supporting the stream. And thank you for expressing that. It's always good to know that you're not just talking into the wind. How can patriots recognize other patriots when the shit hits the fan? We have no uniforms. Well, that's why I think it's a good idea for people to begin forming organizations and communities now. Then you'll know who you can trust. Ben S. said, the Midwest is still very Christian. I hope to see a revitalization soon as disillusionment with the Vatican and globalization is rising. I think it is. I think it absolutely is. You see this awareness rising all the time, but the thing that everybody needs to understand is that you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to clean up your life. You have to clean up your morals. You have to stop coasting. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. But that's why one of the things that I encourage people to do is repent and pray. It will make a difference in your life. It will make a difference in those around you. Corbett Plastering says, Vox, have noticed the lack of liberal outrage to the black female rapper Azalea Banks' racist rant on the Irish people. Well, of course not, because liberals own all of these sacred principles that they refer to are totally meaningless to them. They're just weapons. That's what I've been telling you about the free speech thing. The people who sold you on free speech is not and has never been a right-wing concept. Never. What is truly right-wing is blasphemy laws. What is true right-wing is God, King, country. In an American context, we would say God, Constitution, country. But, free speech and racism and all of these things are fake concerns. They're just weapons utilized to dismantle Western civilization. Eleutheria Bear says, China delenda est. I don't think so. First of all, in terms of sheer numbers, in terms of the fact that they have a coherent nation, in terms of the fact that they have a long, long cultural tradition that was even capable of devouring communism, which is kind of remarkable when you think about it. China's going to be around one way or the other. Do you really think that no matter how much power you had, even when the United States was at the absolute pinnacle of its power and had just conquered Japan, they didn't go in and try to establish an empire in China, and that would have been a fool's game to do it. Let's see here. Chuck McDuck says, at what point do immigrants join the national family, or does a new nation have to form before this can happen? Well, I think that they start to become difficult to distinguish in the third generation. But what we've learned is that the third generation immigrants fundamentally remain foreigners in their heads. So they might look like they've become natives, but they're not. And that's why the effect of the Jewish and the Irish immigrants has been so poisonous in the United States. You still see Jewish writers talking about how, well, we have to welcome Nigerians because if my grandparents hadn't been allowed in, then I wouldn't be here. Well, you being there is totally irrelevant to the benefits of the actual American people. A lot of people just have this solipsistic attitude towards what's good for the nation is what's good for me, and that's just not true. Charles Carlson says, is for faith, family, fatherland good alternative rhetoric for countries that do not have kings? I like it. Faith, family, fatherland. The problem rhetorically is that fatherland sounds too Nazi-esque. There's just nothing you can do about it. I understand the desire to work the alliterative aspect into it, but I think that from a rhetorical perspective, it's got a fundamental flaw there. Notice the two Fs. It's a good try, but it doesn't quite work. Cave Bear Chris says, traumatic podcast, Vox. But you're right. I can no longer identify as a conservative anymore. Now I feel freed and can start doing something. Thank you. Well, you're welcome. And that's exactly the sort of reaction that I would like to see. And I'm not referring to, I'm not referring to the throw money at Vox aspect. I mean, that's fine. That's great. And thank you. But I'm much more interested in convincing people of the right that conservatism and the conservative movement is not an appropriate political or intellectual or philosophical vehicle for you because it is a dead end. Yeah, God, family, nation is good. Although you probably won't. Yeah, I mean, that actually works. Second World Redneck says, can a state or nation be ruled only in a Machiavellian fashion? No. What's the Christian argument against Machiavellianism, and how should Christians effectively run a state? Christians should run a state in the best interests of the nation. And they should do so as honestly and ethically and as in keeping with their Christian principles as possible, but not at the expense of the national interest. God established the nations. And the Christian argument against Machiavellianism is exactly the same one as the non-Christian argument against it, which is it doesn't work over time. Stellar J. Atkins says, Tucker Carlson wrecking Charlie Kirk was glorious. I didn't see it, but that definitely does sound like a positive thing to have happened. Tucker Carlson's been really on a roll of late. I've been developing more and more respect for him recently. He's arguably the most important right-wing voice out there at the moment. Connell Bear says, not all libertarians are open borders. In fact, I've met very few. Well, I was one of them, but they won't be libertarians for long because the libertarian principles always get you there. How to be cool like Vox Day. I'll have to tell my wife that. She is usually telling me, you're not that cool. You're 50. Which I like to try to, remember. Of course, when you have kids, it becomes a lot easier to remember that. Slavic Striz says, I'm from the Ukraine. I grew up here in the States. I see the difference between American and Ukrainian and Russian mindset, even if they grow up here. Yeah, there's no question. It takes, 3 generations allows you to pass on some level. But I think that it's at least 5 generations, and that's only if you're trying to fully integrate. Let's see. Yeah. Mass migration will crush libertarian dreams. That's absolutely true. Our leaders are psychopaths. How can we get around that? Replace them. Was Byzantium a good model for a Christian nation? No, because Byzantium was not a nation. Byzantium was an empire. There were many different nations in the Byzantine Empire. And that would be your clue. The Eastern Roman Empire. They actually had an emperor. Shapiro's fragile popularity represents a propagandistic opportunity for converting conservatives. Possibly, but the main thing is that, we need to continue to get the word out. We need to keep building up those voices that are honest, and we need to stop accepting as our representatives those voices that don't represent us. This has been a problem since the 80s. Vox, you saying that if a third worlder becomes an American citizen, they don't actually become American? I am. Did the media lie to me? Yes, that's what it does. And I realize that you're being sarcastic. Army Dude, I have no idea what question you asked. Lots of people are asking lots of questions here. The only questions that I am guaranteed to answer are the super chats, because that's kind of the implicit contract between YouTuber and viewer. That's a good point by Smitty. Appalachians still haven't been integrated in the Midwest. That is true. California Bear Tony says, hello, Vox. I'm currently living in California and desperately want to relocate. Do you have any recommendations for me and my family of 5? Well, my recommendation would be to return to your roots. Where is your family? I mean, you know, I have family that was native Californian, although I don't think I have any family in California now. But in general, you want to be around your people, your heritage, and your traditions. So that's what I would look to do. And I would value that over, the highest possible paying job that you can get. Let's see. Tommy Gunn says, we in the USA made the huge mistake of demonizing conspiracy theories after JFK was assassinated and the criminals came in. Well, it wasn't a mistake. The CIA intentionally created that concept. STE says, Vox, can you adopt me? No, because we already have enough people and animals. I have enough responsibility. Thank you. Yeah. No one would say an Irishman would become African if he emigrated there. Yeah, you see that all the time. People deny that white South Africans are African. Therefore, an African cannot become Irish if he emigrates there. Of course not. The logic is absolutely clear, but the problem is that most people don't accept logic. Most people are won over by feelings. That's why rhetoric works. They're much more. I like how Steve Saylor dismisses what he calls the 0th Amendment, which is give me your poor, your huddled masses, which was written by somebody who wasn't an American hundreds of years later. And yet they're claiming, oh, that's your founding principle. No, it's not. It's a total lie. Total lie. Bear Clan Man says, thanks, Fox. Jordanetics opened my eyes. You're very welcome. Let's see. Sorry, a Skype comment from one of my friends popped up, made me laugh. I always tell them, they know when I'm doing dark streams and stuff. They pay no attention. You'd think that I would remember to turn it off beforehand, but I never do. Poetry is not policy. That's a good point. Point deer make horse. Yep, that's what the media does. Second World Redneck says, so I'm a Romanian, but what should I do if I find out that one of my ancestors from centuries ago was an invading Turk? Don't worry about it. It is what it is. You need to keep in mind, this is not, at least currently, nobody is going to be administering DNA testing and then saying, oh, you have to be at least 72% Romanian to be allowed to stay here. Like I said earlier, it's what you identify with and where your genuine allegiances lie. Think about it. Look at how people are all going off about the Jews all the time. You understand that the Jews are at least half Italian. They may actually be as much as 60% Italian. I'm talking about the Ashkenazi Jews. But they have cohered because they have developed a series of traditions and rituals that allows them to stay very close together and stay very coherent as a group, even though their DNA is considerably less coherent than many other people's. Jeff Halfley asks, what do you think of 2024? Cruz, Cotton, Pence? My pick is Tucker Carlson, Stephen Miller, 2024. Stephen Miller's not a politician, so he's a non-starter. He's also Jewish, and I don't think that the population is going to be in any mood for that. Tucker Carlson, he's not a politician. So no, I don't think that is relevant. I think that we're going to see a whole new group of politicians coming up from the state ranks. Republicans really like to nominate governors. So if you're looking at 2024, you should be looking at the governors in Republican states right now. Cruz, there's no chance. Pence, I don't see it. Nobody really loves Pence. Chris P says, hey Vox, you missed my previous super chat. Can you find it? P.S. I appreciate what you're doing. Oh, sorry about that. I will, are you talking, was it today or was it on a different stream? And the male Ray says, sorry for the topic change, by the way. Oh, this is the question. Agnostic, but I think it's disturbing to know that a show like Lucifer is on the air. I think sympathy for the devil is a bad idea. I actually like the show in some ways. There's aspects of it that I like. But yeah, I think that from a cultural programming point of view, it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do. I mean, they're trying to get in the way of the relationship between man and God. And they're trying to literally create sympathy for the devil. I mean, I don't think that it works terribly well, but that's what it's there. What are your views on Gnosticism and alchemy? Stay away from them both. And let's see here. As a musician, do you have any idea for delivering regular content to an audience in the live stream format? I mean, just get on YouTube, get a channel on YouTube. Look at Leo Maracchioli. He does great. If you've got good talent, a good sound, and rudimentary video production skills, you can build up a following on YouTube very, very quickly. So basically your answer to my previous question is to legitimize the fact that cultural assimilation and integration, no, that's not right. It is very, very difficult. But when somebody is talking about being descended from Turks hundreds of years ago, it's not an issue. What are the odds that the American government weakens the population to the point where they are unable to fight? That's never, ever been the case in the history of man, so it won't be today. Nicholas Dahlheim says, civil war is coming. Multiculturalism can't go on. Yeah, I think you could quibble over whether civil war is the appropriate description of it, but that is generally true as a sentiment. Chris says, yes, it was today. Okay, let me look it up here. I can find it, I think. Of course I can find it. I just need to get there. Let's see. I should have actually fired this up sooner. Sorry about that. Okay, almost 1,000. We'll have to stick around a little bit longer just to make sure we actually get there, huh? Okay, so community. I don't know why I care about things like that. I didn't used to. Then John Scalzi's followers started getting on my case about all that. Okay, here we go. I'm looking for Chris P. Oh, so I did miss this completely. I'm considering moving to Montana in preparation for balkanization. Do you think New England, specifically New Hampshire, would be better? No. New England is surrounded by the Puritan, progressive philosophy, and I would not want to be there. And I'm, my family was from out there. I was born in Boston, but I wouldn't want to be there. California Bear Tony says, thank you for all you do. Just to let you know, I am of course Mexican, but a U.S. citizen. I have property, a decent savings. Any other advice? Yeah, I would say that, be the best American citizen you can be. Be the best U.S. citizen you can be. I'm the great grandson of a Mexican revolutionary. On my mother's side, on my father's side, I've got American revolutionary ancestors. So, it's these things are not as clean cut as we might like them to be. You have to deal with reality as you find it. You can't just say, well, it's this way. Reality is always much messier than we would like it to be. Okay, we kind of got to get over these "what about me" questions because I have the same answer to everything. I consider Stovokor 41 says, I consider myself largely German, have a majority German ancestry. I despise modern day Germans though. Where should I see myself belonging? I think you belong in Germany and you should fix it. Your people need you. Just because your people have made mistakes. I mean, read about the Israelites in the Bible. Look at how many times they screwed up. And that's when you need good people the most. Richard Wynn says, combine God and Satan to conjure the sorcerer's stone. It's a chapter in my book, 12 Steaks a Night, an antidote to the chaos in apple juice. Okay, that was pretty good. He is, of course, referring to the prophet Jordan Peterson, peace be upon him, and so forth. Christopher McCullough says, any martial arts to avoid for their demonic practices in the same sense that yoga invites demons into your body? I did martial arts for 6 years. I trained with people who were involved in everything from jiu-jitsu to Muay Thai to boxing to wrestling to Taekwondo and Tang Soo Do. I never saw any occultic or questionable practice ever. I mean, the most meditational that we ever got was, he sometimes would turn off the lights and just tell everybody to close your eyes and relax. But, that wasn't even meditating. It was just to get people to cool down when they were all hyped up from having spent the last 90 minutes sparring. So I wouldn't worry about it. Martial arts is about fighting. This Tai Chi, whatever stuff. I mean, you shouldn't be doing that anyhow, just because it's a waste. Tim Yellick says, what about you, Vox? What about me? It has nothing to do with you. I wouldn't talk about it anyhow. My principles that I live by are the same principles that I advise. If you're not surrounded by your own people, then be the best guest you can be. Be the best neighbor. Be the best friend. Be the best straniero. And people will welcome you. I mean, I've told the story. Some of you may be aware of this, but after 9/11, the village elders and the mayor sent the town policeman over to ask us not to go back to the United States for Christmas because they thought it was too dangerous. They said, just stay here, celebrate with us. We'll take care of you. I mean, we do, now we celebrate Christmas and the holidays here. This is our home now. But at the time, we would go to Minnesota and celebrate there. And, the fact that they knew about what was going on and that they cared enough about us was very meaningful to us. I'll always remember that. I'll always keep that in mind. Be grateful. Army Dude says, second super chat try. Just appreciate all that you do. Thanks, Army Dude. I have to answer this one. Colin Cutler says, I know this is insanely off topic, but what do you think about flat Earth? I don't. I literally never, ever think about it. I have no interest in it. And my official position, as I have told people, is that the Earth is a tesseract, and I refuse to countenance any argument to the contrary. Daniel Paul says, the what about me guys are just looking for positive reinforcement to make the hard decisions. If you need to hear it, I've begun to leave Canada and my prospects open up. Just make the decision and enjoy the rush. That's good advice. If you don't feel like you should be where you are, then go find where you should be. Isaiah Haas says, Vox, thanks for the great streams. You're welcome. I'm glad you appreciate them. What sources do you use to get your news? Infogalactic News, Drudge Report, Daily Mail, Russia Today. I really get emailed a lot of stuff, and I don't even pretend to read it all. I don't. I read some of it. I couldn't read all of it. I definitely don't respond to most of it. But I do get alerted to, pretty much lots of interesting things. I mean, if you follow the blog, if you read my blog at voxday.blogspot.com, you'll notice that sometimes there's actually news on the blog that, there's a really interesting article about how Queen Elizabeth has already guaranteed a no-deal Brexit by virtue of sending her representatives to the Parliament to make it clear to them that they are not going to interfere with it. And so whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's the kind of stuff that I do hear from people. Temuja says, wait, meditation is a cult? What have I been doing? Well, what you've been doing is you've been opening up your mind to outside influences. That's what I always tell people when they say, well, meditation opens your mind. My question is, to what? There's nothing good that wants to get in your mind. Malvado 3057 says, Vox, was there ever a time you didn't have faith? Yes. I would say I was a agnostic, non-Christian from probably 12 until 27. So, I was never an atheist. I was never convinced that God didn't exist. I always had a strong feeling that there was something else going on besides just what I could see right around me. But it wasn't until I got a little older and began to get a better understanding of evil that I realized that the Christian worldview, the Christian model, is the only one that actually matches up very well to reality as we see it. Because I needed to study and understand, Buddhism, and I needed to understand Islam and Judaism and some of these other religious perspectives to grasp that none of them even remotely addressed the world as we actually find it. He also said, thanks for the stream. Really has me thinking lately. Good. That's what I want you to do. I don't want anyone to simply accept what I say and look at me as some sort of intellectual authority. I'm not. I'm an observer. I'm a philosopher. But what I'm giving you are just seeds for you to utilize or not as you see fit. Test my ideas. if you actually have a coherent counter argument that actually addresses my points, I want to hear it. I'm not interested in hearing your opinions. I'm interested in hearing actual substantive counter arguments if you happen to have them. I'll put them on the blog. I've done that for 15 years. Gustavo Duran, who very kindly donated some currency that I don't even recognize. That's what's kind of fun about these things. It's like, wow, 2,500 somethings. I have no idea what that is. Could be 25 cents. Could be $5,000. Is projection in the left a strategy or a psychological problem? It is almost certainly a psychological problem. They do it automatically. They do it instinctively. I mean, it may be a tactic that they utilize regularly, but it's something that they just do naturally. It's like a fish swimming. Psychological projection is their natural mode of being. I like this guy, Vox, so far for sure. Well, good. Actually, I like this comment here. Vox doesn't say, believe me. He says, don't believe me, test it all out. Yeah, I mean, that's the way that I look at it. I don't expect people to agree with me. I mean, I'm actually pretty happy when I talk about things and more than half the people don't immediately assume I'm crazy. I mean, you have to keep in mind, that's been my experience most of my life. Most of my life, my experience has been saying what I think and people either looking back at me in complete incomprehension or, total disbelief. So what do you do? Nicholas Dahlheim says, check out Bill Jocelyn on why meditation doesn't work. That's for you guys. I don't need to know. I don't meditate. I'm not interested in it. But for those of you who are, check out Bill Jocelyn, apparently. Dawkins, currency of Chile. Okay, cool. Dawkins is so afraid of Islam that he now loves the sound of church bells. No joke. Well, he's always been a cultural Christian. I mean, that's always been clear. Scott S. says, I was an atheist until I researched the supernatural. If you're interested, look into the scientific taboo around psi, P-S-Y. Yeah, I mean, when you look at evil, you're forced to make a decision. You're forced to decide, is this nothing? Is what I consider evil just a roll of the dice, random, irrelevant, meaningless? Or is there more to it than that? I think there's more to it. PFO Dynamite says, thoughts on the danger of the transgender movement in public schools, peak demonic so far. I think that if you still have your kids in public schools, you are making a huge mistake. Second World Redneck says, do you consider David Ricardo's and Mises' theories to still be viable? You haven't read my works. Look up David Ricardo on my blog sometime if you want to see what I think about him. But the actual answer would be no. Their theories are not viable. Ricardo is worse than Mises. Mises does have some good points. Ricardo has nothing. They should not be updated. They should be rejected. And I mean, transgenderism is just pure evil. It's pure making you turn your yes into no and your no into yes. It's just making people accept the lie as the narrative, and it's totally false. Is it completely impossible to form a reasonable harmony in a multicultural society? It's not completely impossible, but you need to have pretty strong barriers and regions. Is there no historical success example? Switzerland was relatively successful, but it hasn't been around that long. And they actually did things like, physically deport Catholics from the Catholic cantons and Protestants from the Protestant ones. So I don't think that anyone would consider that to be a success in an American context. How long do we have until the U.S. break up? I think probably 15 years. So, all right, well, as an Indian, have you ever shed a tear over a piece of litter on the street? I actually have. Well, I didn't actually shed a tear, but I did feel that way. And last one here, Nicholas Dahlheim, predictions about the government shutdown drama. I think that Trump is going to win. I think it's going to last considerably longer. And then Brendan Harnett said, why do most people in the world not want to talk about these fascinating topics? It's the Super Bowl, this chick, that restaurant, boring. Well, it's obvious. I mean, intelligent people discuss ideas. Normal people discuss events, and less intelligent people talk about people. That's normal. So anyhow, have a good evening. Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in reading more about this topic, I suggest you look up Conservative, How Conservatives Betrayed America. It's a good book, and I will look forward to seeing you all at the next Darkstream. Remember, conservatism was always a dead end. We'll see you the next time. I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream.